Welcome to Swell Session EP.5, presented by the Well Studio. I'm your host, Jen Sprinkle. This is our second podcast of a special series for our Prayers for the Dreamer book club. Today's candid conversation was with Lauren Chandler. Lauren shares about her prayer on worship and gratitude and how the Lord sustained her during a long season of doubting her gifts and wrestling with what she refers to as weak pride, not believing that her gifts were enough compared to those of others. Welcome to our Prayers for the Dreamer podcast series. Today we have Lauren Chandler on the call with us, and she wrote Chapter 3 on worship and gratitude. Welcome, Lauren.
Thanks, Jen, for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, we're so excited. Well, share with our listeners a little bit about you and where you're from, and are you a dreamer or a doer or both?
Okay. I grew up in Texas. I'm a native Texan. Grew up in a loving Christian home, and then met my husband at a young age. I was 17 when I met.
Oh my gosh, I did not know that.
And we got married. I was 19, so I was a young bride. And he is the pastor of the Village Church in Dallas, Texas. And so I'm a pastor's wife. I also get to lead worship. That's something that really stirs my heart and what I found a lot of my energy going to. I do like to write songs, and then I also am working on a book right now. I'm almost done with it, so eventually I'll add to my little, bio line author, which is kind of scary, but I can't wait to be done, honestly. So and I have 3 kids. Audrey's 12, Reed is 9, and Nora is 6.
Awesome. Well, I did not know you were writing a book. Congratulations.
I am. Thank you very much.
I know that is a process, and
it is.
Full of challenges in its own, with distraction and keeping focused and being inspired all at the same time.
Absolutely. And I forgot to answer your last, kind of question. Am I a dreamer or a doer? I tend to be more of a dreamer, and I have spurts of doing. So mainly a dreamer with spurts of being a doer.
And what would you say your husband is?
He's a little bit of both. He definitely dreams, but he's much more consistent doer. So he's a little bit of both, but where I'm more of a dreamer, he's more of a doer.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about, we asked you to write the prayer on worship and gratitude, and a lot of obvious reasons for that. Part of it is your story, which I'm sure you'll share here in a second, and just your heart for worship and song. And worship, we all know, comes in so many different forms, and for you particularly, God's gifted you with an amazing voice, and being able to worship through song is such a cool thing. So share with us just maybe a little bit about your heart behind the prayer and how God inspired you in writing that.
Yeah, I was honestly honored that you guys would ask me to be a part of this project, and especially to get to write a prayer on something that is so dear to my heart, where, like you said, worship comes in many forms. And like for me, just even going out and on a walk or playing with my kids, or just kind of lifting up this song in my heart, maybe of just praise of who he is and what he's done for me, particularly through the cross of Jesus. And so but in particular, definitely singing songs, not just having a song in my heart, but having that song overflow from my lips. It's been honestly a rough road personally, not even with my husband, which I'll go into that soon, here in a little bit, but always knowing I had a little gift of being able to sing. I just was invited, to step in on stages and sing a little bit, but really struggling in my heart just with pride and honestly weak pride, thinking I'm not good enough. Are you sure you have the right person? And looking at other people and wanting what they had, so lacking gratitude, and then kind of squashing the gift that the Lord had given me to sing and make much of Him through song. And so it was a hard road, and it was very humbling. And it lasted probably a good 10 years of knowing knowing that the Lord had given me this gift, but it wasn't time to use it yet. And what's interesting is I'm going through Genesis right now, and I'm on the story of Joseph. And I think it's so interesting that, Jacob, his father, even though Joseph was the youngest, Jacob saw that he had this talent to be an overseer because he gave this special coat that was given mostly to overseers, and he oversaw his brothers. But the Lord wasn't ready for him to step into his calling to eventually be overseer of Egypt. And so he went through this really hard time where his brothers sold him into slavery, and then he was sinned against by Potiphar's wife, and thrown into prison, and then served the Lord in prison by becoming an overseer there, and then being forgotten by the cupbearer to the king, and then 2 years later getting to come before the king, use his gift, and then becoming the overseer of Egypt, where there was just this dark season. It was hard, and there were glimpses of the Lord's faithfulness in the pit, but that prepared him to be faithful in plenty. And so I think that idea of worship, and even whatever gift it might be for whoever's listening, whether it's singing or writing or whatever it might be, that there's sometimes, for Joseph, it was like 13 years before he stepped into this place of favor and kind of stepped into where he was able to save his brothers and his father from the famine. That there is sometimes that pit time where it's hard and you're wrestling, but it's so sweet, because what the Lord can do, if you're willing to go there with Him, is open your eyes to the places where He has been faithful, even in the pit when you're sold into slavery, even in the pit of being wrongly accused, and even in the pit of staying in prison, even though you've been faithful. And so that's where gratitude serves our worship, because we get to see how He's been faithful and count those things where He's been faithful, and that overflows into worship. And that gratitude also serves us well when the Lord does put us in a place of plenty and of blessing, that we can point back like Joseph did and say, you know what, it's God who did this. It's God who's done this in me. It's all because of Him.
No, I love that. I've heard before, if we try to take credit for the successes and the blessings, we have to, find ourselves taking credit for the failures, and that neither of those is what we should be doing. Right. And I love how you talk about that, and I love this idea of worship in the waiting that you talk about. Sometimes God just has us in a place of waiting.
Yep.
And one of the lines in the second paragraph of your prayer, the last line, it says, "You showed your steadfast love by sending your Son to live for me and to die for me. I cannot keep silent." And I thought about, even in a moment where we don't feel like we have anything, we do feel silent, like we don't feel like we have anything to show gratitude or praise for, the simplest thing of sending Christ to die for us is worth all of our worship and gratitude. And I love that you put that in there, because it is such a reminder sometimes, even, in the dark times, we still can praise Him in that. And I love that part.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a relief, like you said, kind of being hidden in Christ, whether we are, whether we're successful or we're an utter failure, that Christ, His life is laid over ours so that God sees Him. And also just the comfort that comes from knowing Christ was made in every way like us, except for not having sin.
Right.
And so he is an empathetic high priest, and he knows the loss. And like you said, when it's really hard to see things to be grateful for, I think about just recently the Texas floods and the family, that one man that pretty much lost his whole family. It's just been heartbreaking. And in those times, and even, going through the season where my husband Matt had a brain tumor and he was given 2 to 3 years to live, and he had surgery, and I didn't know if I'd have the same man. Really, the only thing I could fall on was that I knew God loved me and he cared for me, because he sent Jesus to be God in the flesh and to save me. That is the ultimate picture of love, is that we were God's enemies and he died for us. He sent his son Jesus, and where there's nothing else that we can see that looks even like a silver lining, that can be our silver lining, that he did love us. And what we're going through is not the end. This is not the end of it. And that's what's beautiful about after the cross, is there's the resurrection. And to show that not only did he beat sin and he conquered it, but he beat death, and he's coming back to finally kind of put the last nail in the coffin of death, where we won't know it anymore. And so that's where, our worship will flow from, when we find very few things to be grateful for. There's always the cross.
And it's always enough.
Yeah, right.
That's what's so, we can never have a day where we cannot find something to be thankful for or worship at the end of it all. And I just love that reminder. And I love, you talked about it earlier, and I think it's something worth kind of talking about, but this idea, and I think, as dreamers, a lot of it is some people are in a process of trying to identify what God's called them to, and how really God's gifted them and how he wants them to use those gifts. And I love that you talked about that in this one specific gift that God's given you of song, of being able to sing. Mm-hmm. And for those who have identified their gifting, and it is maybe, I know I grew up and my sister was younger, and my giftedness, I always called them like spotlight gifts, the ones that are usually on stage or out front or seen. And her gifting was more in like teaching and compassion and some other areas that maybe weren't always seen. And it was a struggle with her and I. And now that I've gotten older, because of that, I tend to hide them, or I try to, because I struggle with, I love how you called it weak pride. And I've never heard it called that. And I think that's such a well-defined way to put it. I think that's a good way to put it, because we to call it what it is.
Yeah.
And I think about the people who are hiding their gifts for whatever reason, and not praising God for them, not giving them back to the Lord and saying thank you, and sharing them with the world. Yeah. Can you talk about, I know you talked about a little bit of the process, but maybe drill down on that a little bit more, and encourage the ones who are maybe hiding their gifts?
I think a lot of times we can hide because we're afraid that we'll fail, or that our gifts, once we put it out there, will be lacking. I know that was for me, where I just was like, I just don't know if I'm good enough, and I'm not her, and I'm not him, and just 2 Corinthians 12:9 has always been a place that I've just kind of anchored myself, whereas my grace is sufficient for you. So I'll boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may dwell in me. Just that idea of, you be faithful and obedient to use your gift, whatever it is, where the Lord has opened a door for you, and you let him be enough, and not whether your gift is accepted or praised or feels enough, it probably is not going to be enough, because His grace is enough. And then also, we're just a piece of the whole body. And so I'm going to use my gift and sing like I sing and bring what I bring. And it's not going to look like the next girl that's going to come and sing on the weekend. It's going to be different, and it's going to serve a different purpose. And that's the beauty of the body of Christ, the church, that we get to bring something different and unique that God has put in us for His glory and for the joy of the church, so that we get to build up believers, that we get to invite those who don't know Christ yet in with our gifts. And so to hide it and hide behind it and think, oh, I'm not going to be, what if I'm not good enough, is to rob others of glorifying Christ, of knowing Him in a way that you help usher that in, that the Lord has created you specifically to do that. And then you rob yourself of joy. And also it's a good test for our hearts to see, can we truly say His grace is sufficient, or do we say His grace is enough if I can also be great at this,
right,
if I can succeed here? But to be willing to hit a bad note or have a song fall flat or whatever, and be like, you know what, Lord, I was faithful and I love you, and whether this went off like I wanted it to or not, you are good, and I can rest at night because I have been obedient to you, and you the results are up to you, Lord, and I'm fine with just leaving it there.
Yeah, and I'm visualizing how heartbreaking it is to think about someone giving you a gift and you saying, oh, I wish it was more like the gift
Totally.
you gave so-and-so, or this isn't what I really wanted. And I'm like, that is what we do when we compare. We do not have a heart of gratitude. And then to think, and the idea of God equips us as He sees fit for the whole body, and to not even have, remove the ego from it, that our gifting is what's needed for this or that, or to always keep our gifts and our calling in its rightful place,
right? And
that is part of a whole. Yes. And that we still need what you were saying about, His grace is sufficient, that is the completion of everything, to just keep, and it's at the end of the day, it's a heart of gratitude for where He has us, and where He chooses to bring about success with those gifts or failures, to continue to have that heart of gratitude and know our rightful place in the body.
That's right.
Such a good reminder.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much. If you you have already encouraged us. I kept thinking, I usually close these by saying, share some encouragement with our listeners, and I'm like, I think you've just about done that. I
hope so.
No, good. You have. It's just such a sweet reminder to know where our gratitude is rooted in, and it's in the cross and what Christ did, and that He will come again, and that's the foundation, and it's a sweet reminder. And just, I'm glad we got to talk about this idea of gifting and the gratitude in our gifts, and even worshiping in the waiting. We touched on a lot of things that I think will be an encouragement. But do you have any final words for our listeners?
Just to not be afraid. And that is, I feel like I've said this about different things, but part of the beauty of the gospel is that we get to be free to succeed and free to fail, and that we get to not be bound in fear of what other people might think or how they might measure us. But the one who matters how He measures us has graciously given us Christ to be the measure for us. And just to rest in that and be free in that and use your gifts, great and small, in the closet or on a huge, stage in an arena, wherever it is, you're freed up to enjoy the Lord and make Him known in those places.
Well, Lauren, thank you so much for being a part of this project. I'm so thankful for this prayer specifically because it's just a daily prayer we need to have stored up in our hearts. And I just thank you for being a part of this podcast today and being an encouragement to our listeners.
It's been great. Thanks for having me, Jen.
For more information about our devotional, 31 Days of Prayer for the Dreamer and the Doer, and also our online community for dreamers, doers, and entrepreneurs, you can visit thewellstudio.co. Until next time, have a swell day.